at the Western Wall. Tom Brady with the yarmulke on. It's pretty impressive. You also notice, and I actually did not research this, the Tel Aviv Sabres who won, their assistant coach was featured the most as a black guy, and seemingly an American black guy, which was kind of interesting. And the Rebels, the team from the West Bank, if you look real carefully, they had a black player in one quick scene. He must have been Ethiopian, I assume, because that's the team that wouldn't have any Arabs and et cetera, on it. So I found that pretty interesting. I actually, as I said, I had no idea that there was football in Israel. However, we do have a gentleman in the audience, Larry Meinstein, who played in the original Touch Football League. Do you remember Yonan or any of these guys? You want to talk a little bit about your experience?
Hi. Stand over here. I'm Larry. I lived in Israel for about 20 years and spent 10 of those years in Jerusalem. And I originally went to Israel to be a pioneer and turn the desert green and be a kibbutznik and that kind of thing. And then after that phase passed, after about 10 years, we moved to Jerusalem. And I just found out tonight that I was a pioneer all over again because I was one of the pioneers of the Israel Football League.
But not the Tel Aviv pioneers.
What's that?
But not the Tel Aviv.
Not the Tel Aviv Pioneers, no. I guess you call it Chalutz, which is pioneer in Hebrew. I started playing, I guess it was 1990, which was then, it was the AFL-I, which is the American Football League in Israel, which the AFL had nothing to do with the NFL or the old AFL. It was the American Football League because if you said to anybody in Israel, I'm playing football, of course they understood that you're playing soccer. So the American Football League was something different. I played, I guess, till I left in 99, 98, which was quite a few years. It was back in those days. It was touch football. We had our uniforms and equipment consisted of a T-shirt. If we were lucky, we got a sponsor who would pay for the T-shirts and the silk screen printing. I played with Yona for the last couple of years. He was a few years younger than us. And Steve played, I guess, the first couple of years. He actually did get on the field and play for a little bit, which, it was very interesting because the whole sports scene for, Americans in Israel, there's the Touch Football League in Jerusalem, and we had people coming from literally all over the country to play touch football with us because there was no, back then, there was no other teams in the area, besides Jerusalem. Most of, if we had 12 or 15 teams in the league one year, probably 10 to 12 of those league teams were made up of basically yeshiva kids, kids who were American kids who were coming over either for 6 months or a year and studying, in a yeshiva in Jerusalem, that kind of thing. And for the first time in their lives, it was very interesting to watch from the side, but for the first time in their lives, they had a real chance to play football. It was touch football, but for them, in America, they would never even play touch football or that kind of rec league. And it was very interesting to watch. And I guess eventually, I came to the realization that here I was 30 plus in years, still playing touch football, and a lot of these kids were less than half my age or that kind of thing. But we had a good time. There were a couple teams of real Israelis who had settled and had a few years on us, and we played for that kind of thing. And we had a good time. What else?
Thanks, Larry. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hope you did. Before we take any questions, I might mention one thing Larry just touched on about yeshiva kids. I have my own website now, davidelfinonsports.com, which is out front. There's a flyer and business cards. And I did a piece last November on a kid named Michael Dunn. I don't know if any of you ever heard of him, but he is the starting right tackle for Maryland's football team and has started for the last 2 years. He's going to be a redshirt junior next year. Michael originally went to JDS over in Rockville, and they don't have football. And he was playing basketball and other things when he was in our version of junior high, and he said, I wanted to play football, and he switched to Walt Whitman, where he barely even was playing until his senior year, and now he's starting because he's now 300 pounds. And he walked on at Maryland, and now he's a starter at Maryland. So can make it from the yeshiva kind of a background to play American football. Any questions about the movie, about football, anything DC sports? We have to discuss Dan Snyder. I'll discuss that. But anything you want to discuss, I'm happy to answer your questions.
Did they get a bigger field?
No, and that's a funny thing because if you wonder, if you know anything about football, the scores tend to be 30 to 24, that's a relatively high-scoring game. The one girl had never even seen football before, and she's doing the chains. So you get them where you can, and there are Americans who have some, and they teach them the knowledge of the rules too. And obviously, there's the one official who got featured prominently who was telling the coach to shut up. Imagine a Jewish guy fighting about every single play. I'm just amazed that happened. And Bob Kraft, he's not in the movie that long, but he is very, as you saw, he grew up very religious. He's very, very committed to Israel. Has been there a lot of times, and he runs the best team in the National Football League. Now, people say perhaps they've kind of pushed the rules a little too far, but they've been in, 6 Super Bowls now in the last 12, 14 years, and they've won 4 of them. And, so there have been a lot of Jewish owners in sports history, obviously. We have perhaps the worst in our town, but Bob Kraft basically has become very, very, very respected in the National Football League, and the franchise he owned, the Patriots, were kind of a joke when he took them over. They had been to the Super Bowl in 1985, but otherwise they had been on and off the field. They were a joke, and their stadium was a disaster, and now he's made them kind of the standard. So that's been kind of heartwarming if you are a Jewish sports fan in a way. And B.J. Schiff, we should mention, who was going to be running the event here tonight and had surgery, so she couldn't be here. She sent me a review quickly of the movie, and it talks about, name a Jewish pro football player, are you stumped? Now, if you are of a certain age, you probably know the name Sid Luckman, who was one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. And then there have been other players over the years, Ron Mix, a lineman who went to Syracuse and then played in the NFL for a long time. They're both in the Hall of Fame. But in general, football has been more the owners than the players. Yes, sir. Jay Fiedler, kind of a mediocre quarterback out of Dartmouth. I mean, there have been a few here and there. Steve, you want to show everybody your sweatshirt? Steve has a Tel Aviv Sabres sweatshirt. And I don't know, we're all, when you go to a movie, it's not, I'm a news person. I have to tell the truth. If Dan Snyder wins, I say it's good. If I say he doesn't win, I say it's bad. The movie tries to manipulate you emotionally, even a semi-documentary like this. But how many people in the audience felt like they wanted to root for the Sabres because they had not only a kid from the Philippines, but they had the mix of Arabs and Jews together. Right. Sort of in this time when we've just had the election that we just had, it was kind of a hopeful and kind of a nice touch that they won the championship and the Rebels got knocked out in the first round. And I don't know about you, but the soccer scene was a little scary for me, where they were screaming, this is our country, we're never going to have an Arab on our team. And I'm not saying I want to go and, it's going to be ever going to be perfect over there, but at least the Sabres kind of show you maybe a way things could work out eventually. And I thought that was kind of good that they had the kid from America, what was his name, Jeremy or whatever, who said, I can't believe I'm friends with these Arab guys, and he is. So, it's a little piece of sports harmony, and we've done it in this country. I mean, Jackie Robinson, think about that. Out of Brooklyn, the biggest melting pot place in this country in the 1930s and 40s and 50s, and the things he did for this country, maybe it's not Martin Luther King, maybe it's not Nelson Mandela, certainly in South Africa, but in his own way, he really took a lot of strides forward for a lot of people. And, the Jews of Brooklyn embraced Jackie Robinson, and maybe the Jews of Israel eventually will start embracing this a little more. You saw the stands, there was almost nobody there. Mm-hmm. So, the players' moms and the brothers and the girlfriends, it's nice, but hopefully eventually, like one of them said, Jerusalem had fans, and Tel Aviv, everybody else, the fields are all over the place. So perhaps one day, but they've already gone from a few teams to 10, and it's coming. And, if you've been there, and I assume a lot of people here have been there, soccer is still king. And basketball really has come a long way. And I can't imagine, I don't know, but in 1948 to 1950, whatever, the first few years, that basketball was anything in Israel. Really, it's been a more recent phenomenon. And they sent players over here now for going on 20 plus years, some of whom played at Connecticut. And then Shea Duran was on started on Maryland's women's national championship team in 2006. And she and I were actually inducted into the Jewish Sports Hall of Fame together. So there are some basketball success from Israel, and perhaps football one day. Those kids, their kids may try to come out over here and play. Sir.
What really helped basketball in Israel was that Abe Holland took the world champion Bullets
In 78?
In 78 to Israel. And the Israeli team actually beat them. I don't know whether they were, in prime season form.
Probably not.
But my understanding is that really boosted interest in basketball in Israel.
Yes, ma'am.
This is the Cleveland coach, former Tel Aviv coach.
The Cleveland
coach
Oh, basketball. Yeah, if you know that the coach of the Cleveland Cavaliers is a guy named Dave Blatt, who played at Princeton. And he has coached in Israel for a long, long time. And the owners of the Cavaliers decided to give him a shot, and it's working. It kind of helps when you have LeBron James and a couple other stars, but so far so good. So yeah, that is an interesting point. Thank you for bringing that up.
Last year at the festival, they had a nice movie about Israeli baseball.
Right.
I don't know if you saw that or not.
I did not.
But I just wondering, is baseball still going on in there? They seem like they
Yes.
worked very hard to get that.
Larry.
Baseball or softball?
It was baseball in the film there.
Oh.
I mean, my memories are softball. I guess Larry's are too, and they say it in the film.
Back in my day, it was, the adults played softball. It was fast pitch softball. We had a national team that, the best of the best, and they played, internationally.
Which Steve Leibowitz played on.
Steve, I can say that Steve, there was a picture of Steve playing softball, and it was like an aquamarine uniform. That was the year we won the national championship.
Congratulations.
But, for most of the adults played, fast pitch softball, and there was always an effort to get, bring baseball up from, actually, I coached for a couple of years, youth baseball, basically. So it was in its infancy back in the day, and hopefully it's come along, that kind of thing, and maybe by now it's in the high schools. I don't know at this point what the status
Well,
is.
it's an interesting, similar to the football here, how they started up, and it was getting people from New York to try out and come over. And
My first day, I was in Jerusalem, and this is years and years ago. I ran to a little kid wearing a Mets cap. Like, wow, who knew? I think ESPN and certainly TV around the world now. Back in the day, you couldn't get anything from America. Now it's so commonplace, which is why I think basketball. Obviously, they get a lot of basketball games, but they can get the NFL now. It's obviously on at weird times, but there are Australians who now are interested in football around the world. Now, what's going on in this country with all this stuff about the concussions and the head injuries and head trauma, you're kind of running into that, and then they have the whole deal about the Jewish mothers not wanting their boys to play. I don't know how much that's really good. I mean, these are kids who are Sabras who are, going into the army at age 18. So I don't know if was really a little bit overdone, perhaps, but it was maybe more the American Jewish mothers who had come over to Israel. It sounded like they were against this concept. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Israel is still, it's a different society than ours. The leisure time is a little different than ours. They work a little harder. They work 6 days a week, and they don't have, and the day off is Shabbat. So they're not spending a lot of time sitting in front of a TV watching football games. But eventually, it's the most westernized country in that part of the world. Who knows? We could have a team. The NFL's great dream is to have teams in London and whatever, and they tried that with what they called the World League, and it didn't really work, NFL Europe. But there is still this talk of London, and because you play once a week, it's a little more feasible to have a team from Washington or Dallas or wherever fly over there and play a game versus the NBA. Imagine going back and forth for games overseas. Larry, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, just in terms of watching American football, I don't know how many actual games they get for the NFL because of the time difference, but I can tell you that one of the biggest social gatherings during the year was the Super Bowl. That
Right.
we would get 400 or 500 people at the Jerusalem Hilton on at 2:00 in the morning to watch the Super Bowl. They put up a big screen and they get a special satellite broadcast
Right.
for it, and they would get 400 or 500 people coming.
And I
to watch
imagine
it.
by now, if the crowd is similar, it's probably much more homegrown than it was when you were there in the 1990s. It was by almost all Americans, getting their fix. Now, it's become a big enough thing, and this league part of it, and Bob Kraft part of it, that it's now becoming part of the culture. But face it, it's right now. It's still even this movie is 2012, I guess. 3 years later, it's not quite to the level of soccer in Israel. May never be. Anybody else, sir? Oh, man. Well, you could see, the weather was not exactly brutal Israeli summer, and they're playing there wearing jackets and gloves, and so obviously their version of cold is not quite our version of cold, but it's, it's their winter. So that's when they're, and it's a 10-week season, and then they had a couple rounds of playoffs. Sir?
I do have a question, but then as an aside, as you mentioned the Super Bowl, my wife and I remember when our daughter was over there and the Super Bowl was on, they had to go to the hotel to get them to open up the bar at 2 a.m. because it was going to be closed, and where can you go to watch the Super Bowl at 2 a.m.? But you did say any questions. Last year, my wife and I broke the fast on Yom Kippur with 18 innings of 10 hours of 5-degree weather.
Yeah.
As a fanatical fan, am I going to get a World Series game?
Well, let's just step back for a second. First of all, you guys know he's talking about the Nationals playoff game. And the learners, who are pretty serious religious Jews, they did not go to the games. And I didn't either. It was Friday night and Saturday daytime of Kol Nidre and Yom Kippur.
Well, no, it started, Saturday night, it started at 6
Oh,
o'clock.
okay, but to get there, you'd have to leave whatever time, right? So it was the worst possible timing for Jewish fans, and these are Jewish owners. And I've been in the learner's box during Passover when they had matzah instead of hot dog buns. And
As opening day will be
right,
this year.
and opening will be this year. And it was a real dilemma. And these poor guys, they've only had the team for 6 years. They maybe have owned it. It's the second time they've been in the playoffs, and they couldn't enjoy. And then that was it. They went out to San Francisco and they were done. So that was pretty ironic the way it worked out. If you go to my website, again, davidelfinonsports.com, I wrote a column about 2 weeks ago. If you were a big Nats fan, you know what Bryce Harper said recently. He opened up his big mouth and said, "Where's my ring?" That was his reaction when they signed this pitcher, Max Scherzer, who is not Jewish, from Detroit. And basically, give us the championship now because we're so good, our pitching is so good. Bryce Harper is 22 years old. He was on the cover of Sports Illustrated at age 16. His career batting average is .272, which is fine, but he's not going to the Hall of Fame. His team has never won a playoff series. For him to be saying, "Where is my ring?" was very cocky. And I will say this for our market in general. We are not a cocky market. Now, maybe we haven't won anything in 20-something years. We don't have a lot of reason to be cocky. But back in the day, the George Allen Redskins, the Joe Gibbs Redskins, the Abe Poland Bullets, we were never the cocky team. Leave that to the Yankees and the Cowboys and maybe the LA Lakers and teams like that. So it kind of rubs people in D.C., I think, a little bit the wrong way, how cocky he is. So let's wait a little while, Bryce. And if you remember 2 years ago when they were coming off the great season, they lost to the Cardinals in the playoffs, Davey Johnson, the veteran manager, was pushing 70, says World Series or bust. And what happened? Bust. Don't put the cart before the horse. I think they've got great pitching. I think they're probably going to win, or at least get pretty far. But look at right now, my column this morning was, look at their injuries. They have a lot of players hurt right now, and they have no depth really beyond the pitching. Their backups on the regular lineup are not very impressive. And you think about how good they've come with all this pitching, their farm system, other than Anthony Rendon, has not produced an everyday player in a long time. Bryce Harper, with the exception, he's the number one pick in the draft. He barely spent time in the minor leagues. But where are the guys coming? The first baseman, Ryan Zimmerman, came up 10 years ago. The second baseman, they got in a trade. The shortstop, Ian Desmond, came up 9 years ago. The third baseman, Rendon's the exception. The outfield is Worth, who's a free agent, Span, who's a free agent, and Harper. And Ramos they got from Minnesota in a trade. So they don't have a lot of homegrown talent, in terms of other than pitchers. So let's not, it's sort of like Bryce Harper's doing the Hillary Clinton thing. Like, it's not over yet, people. It hasn't even started. So let's wait a while. I'm pretty sure she's going to run. And she's not Jewish. Any more questions? Well, thank you very much for coming. I hope you enjoyed the movie.